This podcast is sponsored by IQ Bar. Ever read the back of a healthy-looking protein bar? The ingredient list is almost always shockingly bad. Empty calories, tons of sugar, and ingredients you can't pronounce. This is why I love IQ Bar. Every IQ Bar flavor is packed with plant protein, prebiotic fiber, and brain nutrients like omega-3s to keep you sharp. There are no weird ingredients and next to no sugar or net carbs. And they taste great. IQ Bar complies with every diet, keto, paleo, vegan, plus it's gluten, soy, GMO-free. See for yourself why IQ Bar is the #1 brain and body protein bar in the U.S. with over 10,000 5-star reviews and hundreds of thousands of happy customers. You'll love how you feel. Now get 20% off all IQ Bar products plus free shipping. To get your 20% off, just text HYDRATE to 64,000. Text HYDRATE to 64,000. That's HYDRATE to 64,000. By texting 64,000, you agree to receive recurring automated marketing messages from IQ Bar. Message and data rates may apply. No purchase required. Terms apply. Available at eatiqbar.com/terms.
This podcast is sponsored by Eucora.
UTIs are the worst. One year, I had 8 UTIs, and I hated taking antibiotics so often. If you get UTIs, you understand how awful the cycle is. I was taking all the precautions, and cranberry products just didn't work. It was hard on me and my husband.
I hated seeing her in pain, and I wanted to help.
We're Jenna and Spencer, founders of Eucora. We make UTI relief products and innovative urinary tract supplements that give you a way to be proactive. At Eucora, we've helped over 400,000 people get their lives back.
Eucora's UTI Emergency Kit helps you test for a UTI and manage your symptoms until you can see a doctor. Plus, their proactive care supplements support your urinary health from every angle. Get 30% off your first Eucora order when you text BALANCE to 64,000. Text BALANCE to 64,000 to get 30% off. That's BALANCE to 64,000.
By texting 64,000, you agree to receive recurring automated marketing messages from Eucora. Message and data rates may apply. No purchase required. Terms apply. Available at Eucora.com. Reply STOP to STOP. Help for help.
Every once in a while, this show uncovers what I think is a hidden gem. And, sometimes we talk to adventurers who are just larger than life. They've been interviewed 1,000 times. And by the way, keep your ears open because we've got a huge guest coming down the line, someone that everyone in this world knows. Very excited about it. But this episode is the opposite. This episode is a throwback to 2020 when we had Dana Starkell on. One of the most epic adventures I've ever heard of in my life. It's literally the longest canoe trip in history at 12,000 plus miles in 2 years. But Dana and his dad, Don, started and technically his brother too, Jeff, all started on this epic journey back in 1980, June 1st, 1980 in Winnipeg. And they were going to the mouth of the Amazon River from Winnipeg, Canada. Yes. How, you might ask? Well, listen to this story, and you're going to be absolutely blown away. It all started, by the way, when Dana, at 10 years old, bought a book about Tarzan rather than a candy bar with the dollar allowance that he got. And that got him fascinated with the jungle and wanting to visit the jungle. And he told his dad he wants to go down to the Amazon River. It's just amazing how seeds are planted. Well, 10 years later, Don, Dana, and his brother Jeff would set out on this journey to the mouth of the Amazon River from Winnipeg, all on water, through the Mississippi River, all the way around the Gulf of Mexico, up into South America, and then out the Amazon. And it is a Guinness World Record, but just an unbelievable, larger-than-life, once-in-1,000 lifetimes adventure, and I feel like hardly anyone knows about it. They do have a book. I believe Don wrote the book, Paddle to the Amazon, published in 1987. And there's also another one, Paddle to the Arctic, written by Don as well. Enjoy, enjoy, enjoy. This is one of those that'll leave your mouth just dropped. It's amazing. Let's dive in. I'm sure I don't know if you're tired of talking about these experiences or not, but just pretty intriguing. Someone reached out and said you need to be on, and so I wanted to have you after doing research on your experience.
That's cool. I really don't get tired of talking about it. The funny thing is, as the years go by, the experience, in a sense, kind of keeps on evolving, you know?
How so?
Well, the thing is, because I created a word years ago. There's a little town not far from here, a little town called Nauvoo, and I'd been thinking about this concept for quite some time, and I said, there's really not a word for the concept where a human perspective changes. Like we have deja vu, right?
Right.
Where it's a false memory of something that feels like you've done it before, but you haven't, right? But it's like, if you go, for example, back and visit your old elementary school when you're a teenager, and you see that everything is giant size, or everything is shrunk, I should say.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, it didn't shrink. It's just your perspective of it changed, right?
That's
And
very
so
interesting. Wow.
call that deja vu. I put my name in there, but that's deja vu is my concept of anything that changes. Oh, it's altered because of your perspective has changed.
So let me ask you, how has your perspective changed around this journey that you experienced, so long ago now?
I would say just about everything, Mason, because you could pick any subject and it's evolved, it's changed. Like if you look at when, like I was 19 years old when I left. So, you're a young adult, but for all intents and purposes, you're a kid, right?
Definitely a kid, I would say.
And so the thing is, you go off with this sense of, it wasn't that I had some, feeling of immortality or anything like that. I felt vulnerable to what was going to happen. I knew there were a lot of dangers ahead, but there was no way that I could perceive the dangers in the way that my dad did. So like when we left on day one, my mind is filled with the ideas of monkeys hanging from trees and stuff someday. And my dad's thinking, what on earth have I got myself and my kids into?
I can only imagine, man. That's interesting you say that, because looking at old interviews and stuff, he seems to have this unending confidence. But you're saying that underneath it all, he did have this feeling of, what the heck did I get myself into?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the whole trip, and I didn't understand this either when we left because it wasn't something he really shared with us, He was actually looking for something that would defeat him.
Well, what do you mean, like something that gave him a reason to say maybe, like we can't do this, or an excuse not to go?
No, he wanted something that would show his upper limits of what he was capable of achieving. So the thing is, so many times he had set, really big challenges for himself, but then he would achieve it and have this feeling, well, I should have tackled a little bit more.
Oh, so would you say it was kind of a gradual growth towards this adventure? Because obviously not a lot of people have, this is really once in a lifetime thing. So you don't have many adventures this big in your life to go after. So was it just this gradual climb towards really this crescendo of a giant experience?
Right. No, it's a really good question because it was really a big jump. I think, and the thing is, it was spurred on by my dad's the separation of my mom and my dad. So up until that time, he had done all these different types of challenges and different things and canoe racing and whatever. But it was that event that set his mind thinking about something that would be really monumental, something that would be just impossible, something so far-fetched that people, when you told them, they would think you're crazy. And he wasn't doing it for the sake of that, but he wanted it to be that, to be that crazy that, that if you told somebody, they would just be like, you're going to fly to the moon kind of thing. Like, it's just not possible,
Yeah, man. You say it's the separation of your parents that kind of spurred this idea or gave them the ability to do this trip. How did your mom feel about this? How did she feel about her two sons going on this 2-year-long expedition?
So from day one, my entire family, which my dad basically grew up in an Oliver Twist kind of situation. Like he was abused by his mom and dad. They were alcoholics. They used to lock him out of the house in Winnipeg when it was 35, 40 below for hours on end. Just insane situation, kick him down the basement. He had this big scar on the side of his head. He didn't even know where it was from. He met one of his half brothers one time. He asked him, what, do you know how I got this scar? And he goes, oh yeah, Dad kicked you down the basement one time in your head. You landed on a saw, and so when he was a couple years old, or I think 3 or something years old, the children's aid took him away from his family, and he was in front of a judge with his sister who was a year older than him, a year or two older than him, and the judge asked my dad. He said, do you want to go to this children's home, or do you want to go back with your mom and dad? And he said, I don't know. He says, I don't know what to do. I'm too little to know. And he said, I'll do whatever my sister says. And his sister Lorraine says, no, we're not going back home. We'll go anywhere but there, And so they end up living in this children's home, which was like, it was like Oliver Twist. They had this big giant place in Winnipeg where hundreds of kids were all housed, homeless kids. And they would stuff food down their throats, liver and cod liver oil and all this garbage. And finally he got adopted by this one lady, and he was there for a few months and she died. And so he got sent to the children's home, and then he got adopted by another couple, the Roberts family. They were like Welsh. And but he was basically told from day one, they said to him, like, you do one thing wrong and you're going straight back to the children's home. His stepbrother, was kind of, initially wasn't too thrilled about having another boy in the house. So everything my dad owned was in a little shoebox, and he had to keep that in a hallway closet. And that's, that was his childhood. And, he just existed. He did he did with the things that he needed to do to be a part of the family. The last thing he wanted to do was go back to this children's home at that point, He said that, when I was a kid, he would say, the number one thing that I missed when I was a kid was that I never had somebody to give me a boot in the seat of the pants to say, try to do this, or you could do this, or have you ever tried something like, whatever, there was never any inspiration to do anything. But, there was this in Winnipeg at the time, they didn't have today we have the thing called the floodway around Winnipeg. I live in Iowa now, but in Winnipeg there, they didn't have the floodway. And so it's pretty common in every spring, all the runoff that flows north from the Dakotas comes through Winnipeg. And they would get flooded all the time. But in the 30s there, they had this, I'm trying to think what year that was in. It was either late 30s or early 40s. They had this massive flood. And a lot of the city was flooded. And one of my dad's stepbrothers was part of the Winnipeg Canoe Club, or the local Culloden Canoe Club there. And they had a canoe in the backyard. And so my dad got the idea he's going to jump in this canoe and help get groceries for the neighbors. So he gets in his canoe and he starts helping people with the groceries. And he said it was the first time in his whole life that he felt like he was useful, that he had some freedom, and he felt like something, And that was what started his career in canoeing. And so then, his brother being part of this canoe club, he joined the canoe club, and they started doing some little bits of races and stuff against other clubs. And my dad started winning these races. And it wasn't too long, this guy comes along, his name was Bill Brigden. He was an Olympic kayaker. And he saw my dad winning these races, and he was impressed with my dad. And so he came up to me, he said, Don, he said, we're going to start training, and next year we're going to go in the Canadian Championships. And my dad was just floored. He couldn't believe it. My dad knew who this guy was. He used to call him a brick something or other. He said, like, muscles all over the place. Like he looks like a builder, But that's how he got into canoe racing. And so they became a team, and they won a lot of really big, challenging races in Manitoba. They would go up to the Trout Festival. Americans would come up to the Trout Festival. They had really, really challenging races. They won that race 2 years in a row. Yeah, that's how he got into it, And so I think for my dad, more than anything, and to the day he died, really, canoeing was his freedom. It was his peace of mind. He could get out there on the water and puddle around and look for bottles. And he loved looking for antiques and stuff along the Red River. And it was just, he would get out hours before sunrise, practically every single day in the summer. And he'd be gone all day, and then he'd come back and he'd saw wood and chop wood. It's like a wood chopper,
So your dad obviously had a passion, and I imagine at some point, in your childhood, especially, you and your brother were roped in on some of these trips, or just, canoeing in general. Did you both have a passion for it as well? Was it something you enjoyed, or just a way to spend time with your dad?
Yeah, well, like for my brother and I, like my brother Jeff and I, canoeing was just something we did like kids would jump on a bike. It was such a part of our summers that I don't think we thought of it much different than walking down the street. Like my dad, one of his things was that every year he wanted to do something that was memorable. That, he could look back at each year and say, well, I climbed this mountain, or I biked from here to here, or I walked from here, or I swam this distance, or whatever. And so when we got to 11, 12 years old, at that point, I think even when we were around 10, he started having these summer canoe trips. And initially it would be like 1 or 2 weeks, and then it would be 3 weeks. And then, like before our Amazon trip, one time we went way up northern Manitoba and existed just completely on our own for over a month, with our own food supplies, everything. And that was anything my dad wanted to see, like, can we carry enough food and be healthy and strong for over a month in a canoe, away from all supplies and everything. And we had no problem. We came back with food, so he knew we could do that.
Oh, that's incredible, man. So what did your dad do for a living, or how was he able to take off this time off work to do these yearly things, as well as eventually the huge 2-year-long Amazon trip?
Well, from the way that my dad lived his life, and including the way we did these trips, the good news is that anybody can do that, because he did everything on a shoestring budget. Like I think our Amazon trip, which was gone, we were gone for 2 years. I think his entire budget for the 2 years was a couple $1,000s.
Oh man, I've done some cheap trips, but nothing like that. Holy cow. Usually the cheaper my trip, what that means is the more discomfort, maybe the less food, and yeah, just overall more more uncomfortable situations.
Yeah, well, like the discomfort factor again is something that I grew into. Like my dad was not one for amenities in any way, and so from the earliest age, like sitting in a tent for days and days on end with in almost freezing temperatures and constant rain, and just eating very very basic foods, like cooking up pots of macaroni and whatever we had. That just became something so normal to me that to this day, I live like that almost. It's not much different. I mean, I play classical guitar and I'll go play at the finest weddings, and I know what a good meal is. But I can go either way. Like I can be living on, roots that are pulled out of the ground, and I'm just fine with that too,
Oh man, that's really fascinating. Yeah. You play classical guitar for a living, so in case folks didn't know that, but that's really interesting, man. Wow. And so for your dad, just having a tent for the night compared to his childhood, holy cow, that's a luxury in a lot of ways, having a place to call home. What I want to know is that, when you said you got the idea, you were 9 or 10 years old, and then it was another 10 years before you actually left. Where did this idea come from, and how did you go about, choosing the route and really committing to doing it so young? And how was your dad thinking about it, and how are you thinking about it at such an early age?
Right. So initially, it started off there. The initial spark was my first $1 allowance that I got when I was 10 years old.
All right.
And I went out and I was going to buy a chocolate bar, which it was 10 cents at the time. And I ended up wandering to the back of this little store, and I found a book rack. They had these little they called them little big books. And one of the books was Tarzan, and that was my favorite show at the time. And so I started looking through this book, and in the back they had the language, how you could speak to the apes and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's it. This is the book I got to get. So I came home and I started reading this book. And at school when I was in grade 6, because I started school a year early, so I was 10 years old in grade 6, and I remember walking around in the schoolyard, and my teachers were like, what's up with Dana? Like normally he's out there causing nothing but mischief and everything else, and now he's wandering around the schoolyard with his head stuck in this book, And I remember after I finished reading that book, I said to my dad, I said, Dad, you know what I want to do? I said, I'm gonna walk to the jungle, and I'm gonna live with the monkeys and all this kind of stuff. And my dad said, yeah. He said, how long do you think it would take you to walk there? Like my dad wasn't one to look at something and just laugh it off. Like he loved that kind of stuff, especially coming from kids. And I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, let's get the globe. We had a globe because we used to keep a globe in the living room because my dad was big into stamps, and when he worked at the YMCA, he used to bring me home stamps every single day, and I had to know where all the countries were, what continent they were from. We had we had a book for each continent. I'd have to put stamps. I had to know which country went to which continent and all that. That's how I got to know a lot about the world, was just from collecting stamps, and he would get, working at the YMCA, people come there from all over the world. Almost every day you get stamps from different countries, And so he said, let's get the globe out. And so he brings out the globe, and I could reach my little thumb and my pinky all the way from Winnipeg to the Amazon. And he says, so what do you think? He says, how long do you think it would take you to walk there? And I said, well, that's a long ways. I said, I think that would take me 2 weeks.
Oh, man. That's hilarious. And your dad, you said, loved it. It almost takes the imagination of a child, boundless to even attempt something like this. So I'm sure in a lot of ways he was thinking in the back of his head, just how can we actually do this?
Well, yeah, but it was the fact that I thought I could get there in 2 weeks, and that's what he thought was, but he didn't laugh at that. He knows that I'm a kid and I have no concept of distance.
Right. And he's like, if we swap those 2 weeks out for 2 years, then we're talking.
Right. So then he said, so what are you going to do for food? I said, I thought about that. I'm going to raid gardens longer. That's what I thought. It was just like Winnipeg. I figured there's gardens everywhere, And what are you going to do when you get to the big rivers? Oh, I'm just going to swim across. I had no idea. You look at the Amazon at the mouth there, where it goes back out into the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, it's like 150 miles across, and around Belém area there, a lot of that area is 20 miles across and 30 miles across. And the Rio Negro is 20 miles across. That goes into I think these rivers are so massive. I think a lot. If you visualize the Amazon when you're a kid, you just think of it almost like this river with crocodiles coming down and vines hanging here, and you don't think of it like an inland ocean, which is what it really is.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. Mother's Day's coming up. I don't know if that sends fear into anybody else, but you got to figure out what you're doing. And why not do something new this year? It's a little bit overrated to wait in line at restaurants or do the same old, same old. Why don't you do something new? Maybe look into getting an electric e-bike. Transforms day-to-day errands into fun, carefree adventures. Let's be real, the moms out there could probably use a little quiet time to themselves. An electric e-bike can take her anywhere she wants to go. I have an electric e-bike, and I really enjoy being able to run errands, taking my kids on rides, quick trips to outdoor adventures, grabbing all my stuff, and just not having to, find, parking's a lot easier. I can get down to the beach really quick where we live. And electric offers a wide range of customizable and adjustable e-bike options to accommodate anything you need, whether it's bringing kids on rides, grabbing groceries or cargo, all sorts of add-ons. They are so useful, so functional, and the pedal assist is just next level. They're very affordable. They even offer some financing, so you don't have to pay it all up front. So celebrate your mom, those moms in your life, and give her all the freedom that comes with an electric e-bike. This Mother's Day, visit electricebikes.com to learn more and explore the epic models Lectric has to offer. That's LECTRICE bikes.com. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode. Yeah, massive, massive ocean. In fact, depending on how you define the source, it is the longest river in the world, or it's the Nile. They're all within, 100 miles of each other. But it's an incredibly long, incredibly challenging river. And so when you look at your route and the route y'all chose, the Amazon was so far down your priority list as far as, first of all, it was the last thing you encountered. It's a huge chunk of the trip, but you had so much to contend with before that. The entire Mississippi River, literally following around the Gulf of Mexico, through Central and South America, which seemed really just difficult, and then getting into the South America, going upstream until you connect with the Amazon, and then going straight east out to the ocean. It just seemed like a crazy route. Why did you choose that way to go? Why the Amazon? Why going all the way down there from home? Was it literally inspiration of this book and just choosing something that no one thought was really possible?
No, you know what it really comes down to, Mason, is that, when my dad was a kid, he had all this, he had love of history and geography, and he did a lot of reading about the old explorers. And one of the things that really bothered him was that so many things had already been done. I mean, he really was kind of like he was an adventurer at heart, just like in the old school way, like in the 1400s. If he had been around in that time, it'd be him sailing across the ocean, right? And so he was looking at something that would do, number one, he wanted something new, something that hadn't been done. Like nobody had ever gone self-propelled from North America to South America. Nothing that was chronicled, My dad believes that that's how the Indian people did get down there. And he figured out long before anybody was talking about it, because back when he wrote his autobiography, he wrote about how he had figured out how all the native people got down to South America. And it wasn't how they'd said they did. They'd always said how they came down through the land and all this kind of stuff. And he said, that's crazy. There's no way that these native people would have done that. He said the way they got down to South America was following the coast. It was their only reliable source of food. They could always get food from the ocean, and they didn't have to worry about directions. They just keep going. They just follow the coast. And he said it does not like they were intentionally going somewhere. They would just follow the coast because they could always go forwards and backwards and know exactly where they were.
Hey, I mean, that does make sense, honestly. It is easy to know. Keep the ocean on your left or right, like you said. So would you say that's why y'all decided to go after it, as a way to retrace those steps, or just to do something that just to see how the natives did it? Was that a big reason your dad wanted to try?
Yeah, that was part of it. Go back and relive all these adventures. Like if you look at Oriana went up the Amazon, and Cortez came into Veracruz, and all these different, like the Mayans followed along the Yucatan Peninsula. He wanted to experience what all these old, civilizations and adventurers had done. Columbus went all along Panama area there, and I mean, we go down the coastline, and nothing has changed. You can look out along the coastline. We're paddling down there, and my dad says, this could be the 1400s right now, and we're Columbus coming down this coast. This is exactly what he saw.
Wow, that's really, really cool. Man, I'll be honest. I don't really know how to approach this interview for it's just an hour-long interview of something that lasted 2 years. It's really hard to know exactly what to talk about. And I know it was, 40 years ago. You've done so many interviews. There's been, documentaries and thousands of news segments probably over this. I mean, there was a lot to research. There was a lot of information. There's been a book written about it. But, what aspects are there of this that you don't necessarily get to talk about a lot? Something maybe particularly memorable or challenging, or just something important to you that you don't necessarily get to mention all too often?
Well, I'll be honest with you, a lot of things we've already spoken about are stuff that I don't think that I've ever talked about before. Some of those earlier things we talked about in the beginning of the interview. And that's the funny thing with interviews, and I think it was a good idea that you haven't read the book. It works well either way, but not knowing what the story is, it kind of, it's more like a mystery to you, And so it also leads me into different directions, which I think was what kind of you were thinking,
Definitely. Yeah, I love doing interviews like this. One, I don't have the time to read every single book and prepare that much, but also I feel like it keeps it helps me ask, more fundamental questions, I guess you could say. But anyway, with this trip being 40 years ago, man, and, so much has changed in the world. So much has changed for you. I'm looking at the red line of your route that goes from literally Canada down through the coast, all the way down to the U.S., around the coast, down through South America, and out to the ocean from the Amazon River. And I just think about all the little micro experiences, the little seasons within that adventure, and all the anxieties, all the the corruption you dealt with, all the just crazy amount of interactions with people that had no clue how to conceptualize what you were doing. And I know you had lots of run-ins with drug cartels and were held at gunpoint so much time. There's a lot of sensational stories within your overall adventure. What has been the effect for you with this adventure, contemplating over it the last 40 years? Like, is it an overall positive thing that you're happy happened, you thank your dad for, or is it, mixed between that and, man, that was really hard, that had a really bad effect on me? Like, how do you feel about it 40 years looking back?
I would say it's 99% positive, maybe 100% positive, because I'm still, if I died, maybe I'd have a 1% negative there. But, going back to this whole thing about the red line of our trip, going across the globe there, I wanted to mention something about that, because it's so difficult to get a perspective of the size of this planet, because most of the time we're traveling if we're going large distances, we're either in a car or we're in a jet airplane, right? And so, you think of a jet airliner traveling at maybe 450, 500 miles an hour average speed, right? Well, our canoe trip being 12,000 miles long, that would be 24 hours traveling in a jet airplane. Another way of thinking about it, a lot of times I get asked to do a talk about this trip. And they say, well, can you keep it to under an hour? I say, well, I can. But I said, think about it. That means I'm going to be traveling in 1 hour, I've got to go basically 24,000 miles an hour. I mean, if you put that into perspective, but it's kind of a way of, like when you think of these distances, we tend to not think of them that way. But that's basically what my typical talk is. It's a 24,000 mile an hour talk. And that's kind of what you're saying. Like, how do you take this trip and explain it in an interview? Well, you can't, right? You pick little bits and pieces and stuff like that. But when it comes down to people, I have had a really interesting thought that's very current, and I don't want to get political or anything, but it's kind of hard not to sometimes. But it's just something that's, and you can include this in the interview or you can take it out. It doesn't matter to me, Mason. It's however you feel. But for years and years and years, because we finished this trip back in 1982. And I've been doing talks on, slide presentations and talks to people and every imaginable kind of group and organization ever since we finished that trip, And one of the common questions I get is the question that you asked me just now, which is about people, like kind of what's your take on people? Are people generally good, or, because one of the takeaways when a person reads our book is that we had a lot of gun incidences. Like we had about 13 different times when people put guns to our head to rob us, stuff like that. Walk down the road to be executed in Honduras, lots of problems. But why does that is so dominant in the book in a way, because the way that it was edited, they were trying to take my dad's 1,400-page diary and put it into a 300-page readable book, and so they tend to select the most sensational things, right? But there's a lot of space in between those incidences, and all that space is the beautiful 99% of the people that we met that treated us like family. And that tends to get kind of glossed over a lot, People, I remember before we left on our trip, people talk about Mexico. Oh my goodness, well, you guys are fine up until you get to the border of Mexico, but then once you cross that border, everything's going to change. You got nothing but you're going to get robbed and guns and da-da-da-da-da. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is that the Mexican people treated us like family. And my family on my mom's side, all of my family was on my mom's side, because my dad, I didn't even know I had family on my dad's side, because he kind of didn't talk about them because of all the craziness that he went through as a kid, So all my family all existed on my mom's side. Well, they all boycotted our trip. They didn't even come down to see us off because they thought it was so stupid. And the only persons that did come down in the final, even my mom didn't want, they were basically trying to get us to not go. But in the end, my mom and my sister did come down and wished us good luck, But the rest of our family, they wanted nothing to do with it. And they didn't understand it either. They couldn't understand why we're doing it or what the point of it was, But you get down there and then we have the Mexicans treating us like, like we're their long lost family. They argue whose house we're going to come into to have a tortilla and something.
Oh, that's really fascinating you say that, because doing research on this adventure, the gun incidences, the near execution in Honduras was so prominently featured. It was literally everywhere I read, and it did give researching it this sense of recklessness. Like, people were obviously saying, how could you ever do this, adventure, and like, why are you doing this and putting yourself at this risk? But in all honesty, you were averaging one incident like that every 2 months. And, I've had trips with an incident or two like that that was a week or two long. So, as it averages out, it's doing what you're doing. That's pretty remarkable. That it really is 99% of the experiences and interactions are vastly positive, vastly probably just restoring your faith in humanity. But it's also boring. The reason news is because it's the exception to the norm. And so when you take a 2-year experience and have to dwindle it down into, a book or a short interview, the sensational stuff unfortunately does, get the lion's share of the talk and of the book. That's very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Like, one of my takeaways from the trip was that, 99% of people are good. And there's a reason for that too, because people that are nothing but trouble, people don't want them around. They end up getting excluded from society one way or another. And the good people, the world needs good people. They have, like, especially down in Central South America where food is scarce and a lot of people have no money. The only way they survive is through family and friends, everybody working together, and that's how people think. And family is huge. Like, we had people, tying us up, taking us away to shoot us because they thought we were invading or something. And then they realized we're father and son and everything was fine. Whose house are you coming for dinner tonight? So a lot of the stuff that where we had guns was a lot of times people not understanding what, who we were or what we were doing. And we had a lot of times good people after us. Good people sometimes thought we were bad people, and the bad people thought we were good people coming after them. So a lot of it is, but you look at, we were gone for 2 years, all these gun situations, we never got shot. The thing is, if I was wandering around the back alleys of Chicago for 2 years, would I have as much luck? I don't know, because there's a difference in humanity that I find, like in the real poor countries. There's a level of compassion and humanity that's so real and so deep rooted that I think modern society and big cities, they can kind of take that out of people sometimes. Like, when you look at some of the ruthless people in this world, and there's plenty of them too, they've lost that somehow, either through being abused or whatever, but they've lost that, they can take another person's life and they don't feel anything. And I never got that feeling very often when we were down. So even amongst the people that had guns to us, I felt there was a human I was dealing with, not a cold-hearted person who was going to take my life. So you could sometimes feel that. You could feel the fear in a person, and the fear was them not knowing what was going on either. There's a huge difference. Here's the thing that that you can either put in or take out, Mason. It's up to you, but it's just something that's occurred to me this year, and I've been thinking about it quite a bit. And I was saying that up until this year, I've been asked so many times about people, especially on our trip. What do you think about, because you had all these problems, and I would always answer that 99% of people are good, right? But I do have a slightly different thought about that right now because of what's been going on this last while. And that is that I still believe that 99% of people are good, but I also have this feeling that a large percentage of humans are malleable, that they can be swayed one direction or another by leadership. And if you've got a really positive, good leader who wants to march a country in a certain direction to achieve something, whether it's putting a man on a moon or whatever, they can achieve that. But you also have, the opposite way that people can be twisted other directions. And I find that not everybody is so strong personally willed that they have their own compass, that people can be swayed. I started doing some research on what happened in Germany during the Second World War, and I was kind of astonished at the percentage of people that went along with something, but they went along with it through fears and all kinds of different things, And what I'm saying is that, I do believe that there's a natural kind of a goodness in people. But if you look at Nazi Germany, like, why was it that such a small percentage of people, like I say, this is something way off topic, Mason, and you don't have to put any of this in. I'm just talking to you right now on a personal level. But in answer to your question about people, I think it's worth being said. It's a thought that I've had, and it's something I've thought about a lot, is that I do believe that 99% of people are good. But when you look at Nazi Germany, why was it that so few people? Well, a big part of it was fear. Hitler was so good at putting fear into people. So people were literally afraid of their life to say anything, to go against what he was doing. There was a resistance, but that resistance was relatively small because most people were so afraid to do anything. Anybody that stood up, they got shot, And so, like, when we were on our trip, I would say that most of the people that we met, politics was never in their heart in any which way. I mean, a lot of the people that we met, there wasn't a road in their community. They never drove anywhere. We would, even in as early as Mexico, we would come into the bottom of a mountainside and we would start talking to these people, and they'd say, well, where did you guys come from? We say, we're from Canada. Well, they never heard of Canada. We're like, you've never heard of Canada? No, I know what it is, right? And then we'd say, well, it's right past the United States. Never heard of the United States. What is that? You got to be kidding me. You never heard it. Like, you live right here. No roads, no cars, nothing. They're just a fishing community. They'd never gone anywhere. As early as Mexico, we were meeting people that had never heard of the United States. It seems impossible. Now, here's the flip side of that, Mason, which is also very interesting. When I'm in the sauna at the YMCA, a lot of times I'll have conversations with people, and people will be like, well, people don't know what's going on. I said, well, what's the next country? Like I said, that Mexico comes after the United States when you're heading south, right? I said, but what's the next country? In other words, from an American perspective, and being a Mexican, what's the next country that comes after Mexico? Like, as an American, what's the second country? Like, for a Mexican, where's Canada? Canada being the second country north of them, right? And I'll say to them, what's the second country past the United States? Do you know it's rare, very rare, that I can get an American who can name the second country south of the United States?
I'd actually challenge anyone listening to try to name the second country south from the United States. There's Mexico, then what's after that? Let's name that second country. Now, I know we have a ton of international listeners too, from all over the world. We're here, in the U.S., of course, but I grew up in Florida, and, just 90 miles south of Florida is Cuba. But anytime we ever went anywhere, of course, we drove north. We drove thousands of miles north and out west for vacation, and never even thought about going south. Didn't talk about it. Just even from a point of knowing about it, we really didn't know anything about this place, Cuba or Haiti or Jamaica or anywhere in the Caribbean or anywhere in Central America. We never really talked about that, even though it's, less than an hour plane ride away. It's kind of interesting. Wow.
Right. I mean, generally when a person thinks of going south, they kind of visualize that, they know the Panama Canal's down there somewhere, and there's a bunch of these little countries, and they're all kind of bunched in together, and then there's South America and the jungle. And I think that's kind of, and I mean, that's a generalization, but I'll be honest with you. I mean, most times when I ask somebody, what's that second country, they can't name it. They have no idea. A lot of times I get the first South American country or something like that. They skip all of Central America or whatever. So in respect to the Mexican people that are, here we come in this little fishing community. These guys have never gone to school. There's no roads, no radios or anything. How would they know anything? They used to always think we coming off some ship somewhere. We're shipwrecked, so they thought Canada was a little island somewhere out in the ocean. And you try to explain to them where you're coming from. Like, where are you coming from? Like, what do you do? And then the next question would always be, what kind of fish are you catching? Like, you must be out there fishing, right? Because why else would you be out there? Oh, no, I'm allergic to fish. I can't even eat fish. What? Like, how do you live if you can't eat fish?
Wait a second. You're allergic to fish? What did you do about that? I mean, that seems like such an obvious food source for this entire time. But you couldn't eat fish at all?
Believe it or not, I ate salmon and sardines practically every day because I can eat saltwater fish if it's in a can and completely annihilated through being cooked that way. But I can't eat freshwater. I can't go near freshwater fish. And most saltwater fish that I'm not familiar with, like different varieties and stuff, I tried eating. I can't. I just get violently ill, so I mostly ate all canned goods, so my protein was mostly sardines and salmon and stuff.
That is bizarre, man. What an inconvenience, honestly, through that whole time, not being able to eat something that's so, I would imagine, abundantly available. Dang, I'm sure that's in the book. And so, for folks that haven't read the book, I highly encourage you. Your dad, Don, wrote it, and there's a lot of film. Just YouTube some stuff. There's a lot of great interviews and just a lot of good information out there about it. And I know we're not talking about a lot of things that an interview would cover, just some stats and overview and all that. But man, like 40 years now has gone by, and you were so young when you did this trip, 19 years old, obviously finished around 21. How do you think this experience changed your trajectory in life? Because, like we just said, young, malleable. Have you ever readjusted back to normal life? And what do you think the lasting impact on you it has had? Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. Hey folks, if you're looking for an amazing new show to listen to, we teased it a little bit with one of the episodes last week on the podcast. You'll see it on April 11th. That was we plugged an episode in of Hidden Trails of Oregon. It's a podcast produced by the award-winning travel writer Aaron Miller, who is also a former guest on the show and friend of the podcast. And he has this amazing new show called The Hidden Trails of Oregon. And the episode that we had was Crater Lake, lava tubes, and fly fishing with a Native American guide. Well, there are a bunch of other episodes too. Go check those out wherever you get podcasts, Hidden Trails of Oregon. They were recorded on location with surround sound and are basically on the ground adventure stories like we do. Like on this podcast, we sit and talk to people, but this one is there on the adventure itself, recording what it sounds like where you are. It feels so immersive. And some of the highlights of the series include kayaking with whales, hiking in the redwoods, caving in lava tubes, and snowshoeing all the way up to Crater Lake. It's definitely a unique listening experience for folks who like this show. I guarantee you're going to love it. And by the way, it was just voted for a Webby Award. It was nominated, so it's extremely high quality. Like that's a big deal to get a Webby. They're nominated one of the best documentary podcasts. So check it out, Hidden Trails of Oregon. Find it anywhere you get podcasts. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode.
So, in one way, I feel like I lived about 300 years worth of lifetime in that 2 years. Well, how can you take 2 years out of your life to do something like this? And in retrospect, I would say that we gained about 300 years by going on that trip because every single day was a new adventure because we're constantly moving south, very different than if you're going horizontal on the planet, where everything is basically at the same latitude. But when you're going straight south every day, which for the most part we were. I mean, the Amazon is parallel, but almost every day you're going into a completely new environment. So you're literally watching evolution as you paddle each day. You're seeing the birds evolve into different species, like a crow changing as you go day by day. And one of the interesting things, like a lot of people that are into adventure and taking trips and traveling to different parts of the world and all kinds of things. A lot of times they get there by a jet airplane. So they basically leave in a time machine and they're transported to a new world. And all of a sudden they have to adapt to this completely new world. And everything is thrown topsy-turvy, right? And they adapt to this, and then their perspective is completely changed, because it's the only way that you really gain new perspective is by all these new experiences. And then they come back through the airplane again a lot of times, and they're teleported back to their old world, and nothing makes sense anymore because they've changed, right? What's so different about our trip was that we never did that, really. Every single day was that one step into the new world. And so we constantly were adapting every single day to this new. By the time we got to South America, it was just like it should be there. You know, we grew into it, you know. So by the time we were there, yeah, of course, the Amazon was there because we came here and we went there and we were here. And I remember coming across, you know, when we passed through it's called the Dragon's Mouth between Venezuela and Trinidad. And Columbus had tried to get through there with his ships, and the currents were so strong it pushed the ships right back out to sea. So we knew that going through there by canoe was going to be a challenge, you know, and we had to get everything timed just right. But the weird thing was when we came down to the point of Venezuela and we came around the point and we looked across that 7.5 mile gap, and we could see Trinidad. And it was just like, you know, I had stamps from Trinidad, and I remember looking at the shape of the island, you know, from that perspective, you know. And we could look across there and here's Trinidad, like it actually is there, you know. And my whole life, it was just a stamp with some tropical birds. And here it is, for real, you know. Sometimes we used to joke about that, you know. We got all these places on a map, are they actually there? You know, you just see them on, you know. On our maps in Colombia, because Colombia is so crazy with all the drug trade and everything, we'd come into a town. I remember we came into this big tourist town, and it was all these buildings and everything, and we bought some groceries, and we're talking to this guy for a while. He was an American. He could speak English and stuff, and we're like, man, we're talking to him for quite a while. And we said, yeah, we're so glad to be here in Santa Marta. He goes, this is not Santa Marta. We're like, what do you mean? He says, no, Santa Marta's way around the coast down there. We said, but what's this place? It's not even on our map. He goes, oh no, they don't have that on the map. This is where all the drugs come in.
Oh my gosh, that is wild, man. I believe it too.
It's just craziness. So I remember one time we had cut across this massive bay called Bahia de Urban in Colombia there. And we went across there because we were told that there was a lot of drugs being transported out of there. We get across the other side of this massive bay, and we're following down the coastline. And on our map, it showed there was one little tiny town. And so we were going to try to get down there to see if there was somewhere we could land through the breakers and everything. We get down there, and there's one little shack on the shore. They got this thing marked as a town. And we're like, there's a whole big city that's not on the map, but here, this shack is marked as a city or a town, you know? And so my dad says, not much of a town. I said, no. And so we made this joke. We said, Heist Mangley. That's who lives there.
Oh, man. That's funny. You know, I bet there's just literally a million different little stories like that you could tell us. But I wanted to ask, you said you're a dad now, correct?
My little boy, David, is 10 years old now. So he's exactly at the age when I had read Tarzan for the first time and got my mind thinking about it. And it's hard to believe that it's 50 years ago that, you know, this all started. But, you know, I look back, I could have gone with the chocolate bar.
Wow, that is a crazy way to think about it. How our choices change our trajectory, and what seeds end up growing. You know, what if you would have chose that chocolate bar? That'd have been a totally different life potentially. So, geez. So, you know, now that you're a dad, how do you think it's changed the way you look at fatherhood? As you think about, you know, your dad was looking at you as you look at your son David now at 10 years old. You know, is this type of adventure or size of imagination something you want to encourage in him, something you want to have together, or something you want to, maybe in a way protect him from? How do you view that?
Right. It's a complex thing, everybody wants to do their best for their kids, and when I was a kid, I think that there was different things that my dad tried to really get into my head. And, one of them was the value of life, respecting other people. I mean, he would take us up to these northern reserves up in Canada. In Canada, the native people have been shunned a lot and treated poorly, and that's been going on for a long, long time. And my dad wanted us to see the native people in a different light. We go up to the reserves and camp out with them and get to know people. And respect was a huge thing for my dad, to respect people and to live in their shoes and to understand them from their perspective. It's so easy to just look at people from your own perspective, but to really try to understand people from what their world is, and health, like your health is everything. You don't have your health, your friends, all your possessions, everything, it means nothing if you don't have your health. So from an early age, my dad tried to teach me about, eating right and exercising and all those kinds of things. And I've taken that to whole new levels with myself, and I'm constantly learning new things, and I'm trying to teach my son about that. I'm trying to teach him about the evils of refined foods and all that kind of stuff, and just really to get him to understand how his body works, and having positive goals. Like my dad used to say, it's rare that anybody really has a clue of what they're capable of doing, and it's because we tend to set achievable goals. People don't like to fail. I mentioned that in different places in the things that I do, but I think it's very true. That we tend to kind of put ourselves into safe situations where we, it's just, it's survival. It's just human nature to do that. But, if you stick your neck out a little bit, 99 times out of 100, you find that most of the things that you're concerned about, they never happen. Just like Twain would say, in most cases, when you get into these new situations, that's what's so surprising, is that everything feels very comfortable. It's just the thinking about it. It's all your thoughts about what's going to go wrong or all these kind of things. And it's natural to do that. But in most cases, when you actually get out there, like people used to say, well, Don, what are you guys going to do when you get down to the coast? How on earth are you going to get that canoe out on the ocean? He goes, I don't know. He says, I'll worry about when we get there. He said, we may never even get to the coast.
Oh, man, Dana, that's such a applicable lesson right now. Really anytime, just not to, I do that myself. I do it all the time. I'll lay in bed at night and build up situations I'll build up a situation and worry about it, have legitimate anxiety over it, when it has a 99% chance of never happening. So it'll be, and then I'll throw 4 or 5 of those situations where if they were all to happen, it would literally be as rare as hitting the lottery, and I'll get myself worried as if they're all inevitable. And so, with an experience this big, you had to have that mindset, because it's like, what are we going to do when we hit the Amazon, get down to the Amazon? How do we get back? Well, heck, that's 1.5 years away. It's 1 year away, 2 years away. We really don't have to figure that out right now. And there's not a whole lot we can do about it anyway. So, I think that's a great mindset and great point of view.
Always a challenge. I had severe asthma when we left. The doctors, they just chastised my dad. They said he was going to kill me for sure. There was no way I could go off on a trip like this. That I was going to die. And my dad was absolutely convinced that, 2 years of exercise would cure me. And 2.5 months into the trip, August 17th, 1980, I took the last puff of my puffer, my asthma, like Ventolin, and I've never used a drop of asthma medication since. And I remember on our trip, it was about maybe 4 months or 5 months in, the asthma medicine that I had, my puffer, I don't know what happened to it. It was a metal canister at the time. It was isopranol. I think I had isopranol and Ventolin. No, at that time it was just Ventolin. But my Ventolin inhaler was like a metal canister. I don't know what happened, but it just vaporized. There was nothing left in there. I could shake it. I could tell there was no liquid in it whatsoever. but I kept that puffer with me the entire trip, kind of like a security blanket. Even though I knew it, there was nothing in there because I was so paranoid still from all those years of having that spray that if I had an asthma attack, that maybe we could crack it in half and I could crack it in half and I'd get one drop out of it or something. But I was just so paranoid about having a split. It never happened. August 17th, I did have a couple little incidents. I remember one time we passed by some kind of a big smokestack on the Yucatan Peninsula. It was belching out this just like toxic smoke. And I had this severe asthma attack from it. But after we passed by, a couple hours later, I was okay.
Gosh, this story gets crazier and crazier, Dana. Oh my word, that is nuts. That's a huge risk. That's scary. To think about as a parent or as having the asthma itself. And I'm going to have to read the book and probably have you on again just to kind of ask some specific details, ask some specific questions about some of the stuff. But, I'm sure one of the reactions you get a lot with hearing just how overwhelmingly large this adventure was for people or something you heard when you first got back was, how was your trip? Which is, I'm sure it can be frustrating, and I'm sure you get a lot of different responses to that. But I mean, how do you even answer that? So I just appreciate you being on and talking about just a little snippet of what this was like.
Oh yeah, it's funny because as the years go by, like sometimes I'll be in a group of people or something, and somebody will know about the trip. And somebody will say to somebody who's a canoeer or whatever, they'll say, this guy, he paddled to the Amazon. Now you get kind of two, extreme responses. One response would be, "Oh, that's cool. I went canoeing one time," and then there's the other response, which is, "What? Where did you go?" Like in other words, and then some people I could tell by their questioning in 2 seconds that they're like, "This is just a bunch of BS, right? There's no way that this is real. Like how?" And the funny thing is, I've grown to really actually appreciate the second response better because it says a lot more about somebody who's aware of the distances and thinking about it and looking at it as aside from just sort of like blowing it off as, a weekend trip, like how could that be, right? So it's an interesting thing, but it's all interesting because either way, people, it changes the way they think. If they ask you questions, you start talking about stuff and you can see all their brain molecules are realigning.
Well, you can now refer them to this episode to get a little more information if they're wanting more. But gosh, man, Dana, thank you so much for joining. This has been an incredible story about the longest ever canoe trip ever. It's pretty awesome to talk to you. So, is there anything else you wanted listeners to know before we end the conversation?
Just a very simple thing, Mason. For anybody who's listening to this interview, my dad would just say one simple thing, and it's the same thing I would say is, life is incredibly short. You never know what's around the bend tomorrow. If there's something that's really important to you, that really, really matters, something that's been on the back burner, something you've thought about maybe for years, sit down today, not tomorrow. Get a piece of paper, start mapping out a plan. When you're going to do this, how you're going to do it, how many steps is it going to take, make a plan, and set a date and do it. Because if you don't, it will just disappear. When we went to the Amazon, I knew, even though I was a young kid, I knew that was going to be a time to do it. I'll never have the opportunity to do that again. I wouldn't have, like my dad, I relied on my dad so much, all of his canoeing experience and all of his knowledge about survival and different things. We were a great team, we kind of balanced each other out. I was young and more fearful about things, and I would kind of pull him back at times when I think we needed to. But these times, they come and they go. One day you're going to be 95 or 100 if you're lucky, and you're not going to be climbing up, 20,000-foot mountains. Maybe if you take really good shape of yourself, you still could. But there's times when you can do things, and the time is now.
No truer words have ever been spoken. Y'all heard them. Get out there, get some paper, start jotting down a plot. Heck, I got some things I need to start jotting down. So Dana, thanks again for being on. Gosh, what an awesome story. What a great experience. And thanks for continuing to tell it so many years later. And we'll probably have you back on again and talk about something else. You've done a lot more adventures, so we will have to have you back on. But anyway, thank you.
Very cool. No, I really appreciate you taking the time to even be interested, Mason. It's fantastic. And to all your listeners and everything, just from the bottom of my heart, I wish you the very best, safe travels, and that's fantastic,
Thanks, Dana. Have a great one.
All right, Mason. You have a great day. Nice talking.
All right, see you, man. Talk soon.
Bye.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to growing the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.
The Venture X card from Capital One gives you premium travel benefits, perfect for seeing Taylor Swift the Eras Tour. Presented by Capital One. Ooh, I do love her. Earn 5 times miles on flights and 10 times miles on hotels through Capital One Travel.
Enjoy your stay in Suite 13.
Whoa, 13? That's Taylor's lucky number. The Venture X card from Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details.
Dr. Rick here. If you find yourself getting particular about where you get the weather, you may be turning into your parents.
Looks like it might rain. Let's see what Corey from Channel 2 has to say. He's something else. I like him better than Harris from Channel 5.
You could just look up the weather on your phone.
I like Corey from Channel 2.
Progressive can't help you from becoming your parents, but we can help you compare rates on home insurance with Home Quote Explorer. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company affiliates and third-party insurers. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.